"These heartless little bastards, you three are a disgrace to this community," one of the women hissed, standing just inches from my youngest daughter's tear-streaked face. I arrived just in time to hear those words, sharp, cruel, and delivered like a verdict in a courtroom where we'd never been allowed to speak. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just smiled, looked the woman dead in the eyes, and said, "Thank you." Then I turned around and walked away. That moment, calm on the outside, burning on the inside, was the beginning of everything. It was supposed to be a lighthearted morning. Just me and my two daughters, Natalie and Grace, at the Saturday market. Something we did almost every weekend. Fresh produce, local honey, handmade chocolates. It felt like a small pocket of peace after a long, traumatic year. It had been 8 months since my ex-husband died. He was 48. A car accident. Sudden. Shocking. The kind of phone call that splits your life into before and after. And as if death wasn't enough, what came after cracked our family to its core. You see, just 3 weeks before he died, I had filed for divorce. After discovering his affair. And not just any affair. A long-term relationship with another woman that had resulted in 2 children. Twin boys. When the woman died in the same accident that killed him, it left those boys orphaned and exposed everything he'd tried so hard to hide. My daughters were the ones who uncovered the truth. They found the photos, the texts. They knew before I did. And they carried that pain, the guilt, the betrayal, not just of a father, but of a man they once trusted with their entire hearts. So when his parents, my ex-in-laws, started demanding to see them, demanding custody even, as if nothing had happened, my girls said no. They were clear. They needed space, therapy, healing. Apparently no wasn't good enough. That Saturday was Grace's birthday. She had just turned 15. As a surprise, I gave her a small budget and let her wander the market with Natalie. They were gone maybe 45 minutes when I got the call. Grace's voice was trembling. "Mom, these women, they won't let us leave. They're yelling about Grandma and Grandpa. They're saying horrible things." By the time I got there, Natalie had already stepped in front of her sister, shielding her from the group. 6 older women, all dressed in Sunday best, like they'd walked straight out of a sermon and into a stoning, had surrounded them. They weren't just strangers. I recognized 3 of them from the church my ex-in-laws attended for decades. Women who'd once brought us casseroles. Women who now spat accusations like venom. Unchristian behavior, they called it. Ungrateful little girls. Too proud to accept their family. Too heartless to care for their poor orphaned baby brothers. Natalie tried to speak, but I stepped between them. "You've made your point," I said evenly. "Now get away from my daughters." One of the women scoffed. "You're no better. A wife should never turn her husband's family away. You've turned those girls into bitter little rebels. Shameful. Absolutely shameful." And that's when I smiled and said, "Thank you." We were all escorted out of the market shortly after that. The screaming had drawn attention. A scene had been made. And although the market staff clearly didn't know who was to blame, they wanted us all gone. The women followed us to the parking lot like vultures, watching, judging, whispering. I got my girls into the car and drove off without another word. But in my mind, something had shifted. This wasn't just a family squabble anymore. It wasn't just grief, or boundaries, or misunderstandings. It was harassment. It was manipulation. And it was coordinated. That night, after my daughters went to bed, I logged into Facebook. There it was. On the private page of the church my ex-in-laws belonged to, a post written by my former mother-in-law. Nearly 1,000 words, framed like a prayer request, but dripping with deception. How we had abandoned her. How we refused to care for the boys. How we inherited everything and left her and her husband penniless and alone. How my daughters had rejected their duty as sisters. And the final blow? She claimed the boys were the result of a surrogacy arrangement. That I was infertile, and that I had rejected them because they were boys. A lie so twisted, so cruel, it actually stole my breath. I sat in the dark, rereading it, my fingers trembling, not with sadness, but with a slow, rising resolve. They thought they could rewrite the story, but I had something they didn't. Receipts. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I called in a personal day, brewed the strongest coffee I could make, and sat down at the kitchen table with a stack of old folders, my laptop, and a thumb drive that I had almost forgotten existed. My hands moved steadily, almost mechanically, as if they'd been waiting for this moment. I didn't feel rage, not in the way I thought I might. What I felt was clarity, cold, focused, unshakable. Because if they wanted to weaponize lies and sympathy, I would fight back with truth. And not just for me, for my daughters. The thumb drive contained everything I had gathered in the months leading up to the divorce. Screenshots of text messages between my ex and his affair partner. Photos of the two of them together. Some in our house. Bank records showing money transfers to her. Emails between my ex and his parents discussing how to ease the girls into the idea of new siblings. But that wasn't all. I had saved voicemails too. One from my ex-mother-in-law just days after he died, blaming Natalie and Grace for his death. She said if they hadn't pushed me to leave, he'd still be alive. Another voicemail from his father slurring through anger, calling my daughters heartless little bastards and ungrateful brats who will burn for turning their backs on blood. I had emails, messages, voice recordings. I had proof, and the legal right to use it. See, my divorce wasn't finalized before his accident. That meant the court hadn't sealed the documents. Nothing I had gathered was under legal protection, which meant I could use everything. By noon, I was standing at the print shop counter, handing over a flash drive to a young man with silver hair and half-moon glasses. "I need full-color, high-quality prints," I said. "Front and back, clean binding." He raised an eyebrow as he scrolled through the files. These are personal." "Yes," I replied. "And they need to look professional. Think, church program meets courtroom evidence." He blinked, unsure if he should be amused or concerned. "How many copies?" 10. While I waited for the binders to be printed, I stopped at a craft supply store. Picked up soft navy blue covers, gold-embossed paper sleeves, and some glue sticks. I knew exactly what I was doing. Back home, I spent hours assembling the binders by hand. Each one began with a full-page photo of my ex and his affair partner kissing in our living room. The TV was on in the background. You could see my youngest daughter's art taped to the wall behind them. Beneath the photo, in elegant script, I wrote, "Michael Jennings and Leah Porter, a love story." It felt wicked, but honest. The next pages told the full story, like chapters in a book. Text exchanges about sneaking around during our family vacations. Notes from therapy sessions where my daughters expressed their trauma. Emails from his parents encouraging him to keep lying to me for the sake of peace. And finally, their cruel messages to my girls, some written just 2 days after his funeral. By midnight, I had all 10 binders lined up on the kitchen counter. Identical, neat, devastating. I didn't sleep much, but when I did, I slept deeply. The kind of sleep that comes after a storm passes. Sunday morning, I dressed simply. Slacks, a cardigan, flats, the kind of outfit that wouldn't draw attention. I drove to the church just before service began. It was the same church I had once attended with my ex-in-laws. The same place where we held his funeral, where people hugged us with one arm and whispered with the other. Inside, there was a welcome desk in the back, a table with hymnals and prayer guides for those who forgot their own. No one ever watched it closely. I walked in like I belonged there. No one stopped me. And with calm, precise movements, I placed a binder beneath each row of hymnals. 10 in total. 1 for each aisle. By the time the opening prayer began, I was already back in my car, pulling out of the parking lot. By noon, the Facebook group was on fire. At first, it was confusion. Then came the anger. Apparently, the binders had circulated quickly, passed around in hushed whispers before the second hymn. Someone had even taken photos and uploaded them online. Screenshots of text messages, a picture of my ex holding one of the twins, captioned, "Our miracle baby from the surrogate." Except Leah Porter was no surrogate, and everyone knew it now. By mid-afternoon, I received a call from a former friend at the church. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "That binder, it's brutal." "Brutal?" I said. "Number what's brutal is grown women surrounding a grieving 15-year-old girl at a farmer's market and calling her disgusting." There was a pause, then a whisper. "You're right." Later that night, my daughter Natalie walked into the kitchen. She had seen the church thread, heard the fallout. "Mom, did you do this?" I looked up, unsure of what to say. Her lips curled into the faintest smile. Good. By Monday morning, the entire church community was in disarray. I hadn't planned to monitor the chaos, but it was hard to ignore when people began messaging me directly. Some apologized. Others asked for clarification. A few tried to defend my ex-mother-in-law, saying she meant well and was just grieving in her own way. But the truth was out now, and no amount of pity could erase what people had seen with their own eyes. My phone buzzed constantly. Facebook notifications, emails, text messages. I muted them all and focused on getting my daughters ready for school. Grace seemed lighter that morning, less withdrawn. Natalie had even braided her little sister's hair before breakfast, something she hadn't done in months. Neither of them asked about the binders. They didn't need to. They knew, and they understood it wasn't revenge. It was defense. It was protection. It was the only language these people seemed to listen to. Later that morning, I received a call from Caleb, an old friend who still attended the church and had always kept a soft spot for my family, even after the divorce filing. "Kira," he said, "it's a circus over here." You wouldn't believe the things being said. "Try me," I replied, sipping my tea with the calm of someone who had been through far worse. Well, for starters, Pastor Mitchell had to step in and shut down the Facebook group entirely. There were fights breaking out in the comment sections. Some of the older women were accusing each other of knowing about the affair and staying silent. That made me pause. I hadn't expected that. "They knew?" I asked. "Some did," he said. Apparently, it was an open secret among a few of the older couples. The idea was to protect the family's image until things blew over, but your evidence kind of destroyed any chance of that. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of that betrayal settle somewhere deep. So many people had known, and yet they watched my daughters suffer in silence, thinking they were the problem. "Thank you for telling me, Caleb," I said. "There's more," he added hesitantly. "Your ex-mother-in-law. She's been publicly shamed. Several women confronted her after service. One of the deacons called an emergency meeting with the elders. I don't know what they'll decide, but she's not coming back from this clean." I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. It wasn't about humiliating her. It was about stopping her. About showing her that actions have consequences. That she could no longer manipulate people with carefully constructed sob stories. By Wednesday, 2 things arrived in the mail. One was a letter from an elderly woman I barely knew. She'd included a handwritten apology to both my daughters. The other was a formal invitation from the church's Women's Council, asking if I'd be willing to attend a reconciliation lunch. I stared at the invitation for a long moment before setting it aside. There would be no reconciliation. Not when Natalie had spent 2 months of therapy blaming herself for ruining the family. Not when Grace still had nightmares of her grandmother's voice telling her she was broken like her mother. No lunch would undo that. That night, as we sat on the couch watching a movie, Grace suddenly spoke up. "Mom, do you think Grandma really believes we're evil?" I turned to her. Her eyes were glassy, distant. Natalie paused the movie without a word. I reached over and took Grace's hand. "No, sweetheart. I think she's scared. scared that if people see the truth, they'll realize she's not the person she pretends to be. And instead of owning her part in this, she blamed the only people who never had a choice. Grace didn't say anything, but she leaned into my shoulder and stayed there. Natalie resumed the movie. We never finished it. The next morning, my lawyer called. "I've just been served notice," she said. "Your ex-in-laws have officially filed for custody of the girls." I closed my eyes and breathed in. Slowly, deeply. Of course they did. "They're not going to win," I said calmly. "I know," my lawyer replied, "but we'll need to be thorough. They're claiming emotional neglect, that the girls are being turned against their only remaining blood relatives. They're being protected from people who call them names." I snapped. "I agree with you, but we're going to need documentation. All of it." "I already have it," I said, opening the desk drawer where my folder of evidence waited. That evening, after the girls went to bed, I sat down at my laptop and began compiling everything. Emails, voicemails, social media posts, screenshots of the church Facebook group before it went dark. And of course, the binders. If they wanted to drag this into court, I'd be ready. But what they didn't realize was this. They'd already lost, because now the community wasn't backing them anymore. Now the girls knew the truth. And now, I wasn't alone. The subpoena arrived on a Thursday. It was neatly tucked into a manila envelope, hand-delivered by a process server who asked, with unconvincing politeness, "Are you Kira Jennings?" I nodded, took the envelope, and closed the door without a word. Inside, it was all there. My ex-in-laws, Henry and Elaine Jennings, had formally filed for emergency custody of Natalie and Grace. Their claim? That I was emotionally unstable, bitter over my husband's death, and poisoning the girls against their true family. I stared at the page for a long time. They'd crossed a line. Before, they were just meddling, manipulative, and cruel. Now, they were dangerous. I called my lawyer immediately. "They're pushing hard," she said, flipping through the documents on her end. "They've filed for a hearing within 3 weeks. That's unusually fast." "Can they do that?" "They can request it," she said. "But it's usually only granted in actual emergencies. Abuse, drug use, serious neglect. You've got none of that. But they're hoping to catch you off guard. They're going to be disappointed." The next few days became a blur of preparation. I pulled every record I had. Every therapy note that showed how the girls were recovering. Copies of the voicemails where Elaine screamed at me. Texts calling my daughters selfish little girls who destroyed their father. I even included the letter from the woman at church who apologized to them, because even strangers could see what was happening. My lawyer was impressed. "I've never had a client more prepared," she said. "This case is built like a fortress." "I'm a mother," I told her. "They came for my daughters. What else did they expect?" But even with the strength of our case, I wasn't prepared for what came next. It was Sunday morning when I saw it. An email from Megan Thompson, Natalie's former best friend's mom. We hadn't spoken in almost a year. Not since the divorce was announced. I almost ignored it, but something told me to read. "Kira, I don't know how to say this, but I need you to know I've been speaking with Elaine. She reached out to me and several other moms. She's been trying to get people to testify on her behalf. She's saying awful things about you, that you're unstable, emotionally abusive, and turning the girls into angry atheists." I didn't believe her. But some people, they're listening. I reread that paragraph 5 times. My stomach turned. They were trying to build a case on lies, and they were using people I used to trust to do it. I called Megan immediately. "Did she say who she contacted?" "Not everyone," she replied. "But I know she spoke with Ms. Carter from the PTA, and maybe even with your neighbor Susan." I sighed. Susan had never liked me. She always had something to say about my garden or my chaotic schedule. "I just thought you should know," Megan added. I told her I wasn't interested, but she's trying to build momentum. "Thank you," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. I always thought you were a good mom, she said gently. So did Natalie. You don't deserve this. That evening, I sat in the living room watching Natalie and Grace do homework at the dining table. They were calm, peaceful, more at ease than they had been in months. I hated that I had to keep this from them. That while they were starting to breathe again, their grandparents were plotting to take that away. I would not let them. The next morning, I had my lawyer draft a motion to dismiss the emergency custody request and file for a protective order. One that would legally bar my ex-in-laws from contacting the girls directly. We attached everything. Screenshots, voicemails, texts, even the binder. When my lawyer saw the opening photo, the one of Michael and Leah in our living room, she looked up at me. This? She asked. It started here, I said. Let it end with the truth. By Friday, news of the custody filing had leaked. Elaine's supporters tried to rally again, mostly in whispers, Facebook comments, and veiled posts about forgiving mothers who've lost their way. But something had shifted. This time, people pushed back. Caleb texted me again. You wouldn't believe what's happening, he wrote. The church board has suspended Elaine's membership pending the outcome of the case, and 3 families pulled their kids from the youth group. I was stunned. Why? Because their kids were friends with Natalie and Grace, and they're tired of the hypocrisy. One mom said, if that's what Christianity looks like, I want no part of it. I sat with that for a long time. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about truth, about standing up when it's easier to stay quiet, about teaching my daughters, by example, that when someone tries to rewrite your story, you don't hand them the pen. You take it back. The courthouse smelled like stale coffee and worn paper. I had been here before, during the early stages of my divorce, but this felt different. This time, I wasn't defending a broken marriage. I was defending my daughters. Natalie sat to my left, her jaw set, fingers nervously twisting the hem of her blazer sleeve. Grace was beside her, eyes wide but steady. She wanted to be here. She had insisted. I want to look her in the eye, she had said the night before. I want her to see that we're not scared anymore. I hadn't expected that kind of courage from a 15-year-old, but then again, my girls had grown up fast. Too fast. Across the room, Elaine and Henry Jennings sat behind their attorney, looking as if they'd just stepped out of a glossy church bulletin. Henry stared straight ahead. Elaine, dressed in a soft blue blouse and pearl earrings, occasionally glanced our way with the same smug, wounded expression she had worn at my ex-husband's funeral. Their lawyer opened the proceedings with the usual formalities, but the moment she began her argument, I felt my pulse rise. She painted me as unstable, bitter, emotionally manipulative. Claimed I'd isolated the girls from their rightful family. Referred to the Facebook post Elaine had written, yes, that post, as a cry for help from a grieving grandmother. No mention, of course, of the part where they accused Grace and Natalie of being a disgrace to their father's name. Then it was our turn. My lawyer stood, calm and deliberate. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize. She just presented. First, the voicemails. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as Elaine's voice played through the speaker system. Sharp, biting, unmistakable. You little monsters. I hope you cry yourselves to sleep every night until you remember what you did to him. Then came the texts, the screenshots, the images. A photo of my ex and Leah in our home, followed by a message from Elaine telling him not to confess too soon, or he'd ruin everything. The judge leaned back, brows drawn. And then finally, my lawyer pulled out the binder. The courtroom clerk passed it up to the bench. The judge flipped through the pages slowly, then looked directly at Elaine. I've read this cover to cover, she said. Do you deny any of this? Elaine opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Then something happened that none of us expected. Caleb stood up in the back of the courtroom. I'd like to speak, Your Honor, he said. If you'll allow it. He was sworn in as a character witness. I didn't ask him to come. I didn't know he would. But he did. He told the judge how long he'd known our family, how he'd watched my daughters grow up, how Elaine had twisted the church community into rallying around her lies until the truth could no longer be denied. She weaponized her grief, he said plainly, and she tried to destroy these girls in the process. Elaine let out a choked gasp, but the damage was done. By the end of the hearing, the judge didn't even hesitate. The petition for emergency custody is denied. Furthermore, this court finds sufficient cause to issue a restraining order barring the petitioners from contacting the minors directly or indirectly for a period of no less than 1 year. Elaine's mouth fell open. Henry lowered his head, saying nothing. And Ms. Jennings, the judge added, turning to me, I want to commend you. It's rare that a parent comes this prepared and this composed in the face of such hostility. Your daughters are lucky to have you. I nodded, unable to speak. Natalie squeezed my hand. Grace blinked hard, her lower lip trembling. We had won. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. I hadn't told anyone. But the story had leaked. Maybe through Caleb, maybe someone from the church. I didn't care. One of them called out, Ms. Jennings, do you have any comment on the ruling? I turned, still holding my daughter's hands. Yes, I said. I do. Let this be a reminder that grief doesn't excuse cruelty, and that protecting your children doesn't make you vindictive. It makes you a parent. That night, we ate pizza on the living room floor. Grace laughed for the first time in weeks. Natalie put on her favorite music. I didn't cry until they went to bed. Not from sadness, but from relief. The war wasn't over yet, but the battlefield was no longer in their hands. It took 3 weeks before the silence felt real. No calls, no letters, no lurking church ladies outside the grocery store. Just quiet. Peaceful, uneasy quiet. The court order had done what logic and boundaries never could. It shut them down. Elaine and Henry Jennings had officially been barred from any contact with Natalie and Grace for 12 months, with an extension possible pending review. But I knew them well enough to know the silence wasn't surrender. It was retreat. A chance to regroup. To plot. But this time we weren't hiding. And we weren't afraid. Grace returned to therapy with renewed purpose. I want to talk about how I froze, she told her counselor. At the market. I want to understand why I just stood there. Natalie started writing again. Pages and pages of poetry and reflections that she kept in a floral notebook tucked under her pillow. I never read it, but I caught glimpses of lines when she left it open by accident. You don't heal by pretending it didn't hurt. She called me broken, but I'm still standing. As for me, I finally started sleeping through the night. For the first time in over a year, I didn't keep my phone under my pillow, waiting for another crisis. Then came the letter. Handwritten, slanted cursive on stiff cream-colored stationery. It was from Elaine. She didn't apologize. Not really. But she did what narcissists often do when their world caves in. She reframed the story to make herself look like the victim again. She wrote about losing everything. Her son, her place in the church, her connection to the only grandchildren she had left. She mentioned the custody battle as if it were a misstep, not a full-scale attack. And in the final paragraph she wrote, I pray one day you will allow us to be part of the girls' lives again. Family is all we have. I folded the letter neatly and slid it into a folder labeled Documentation. I didn't respond. Around the same time, Caleb reached out again. The pastor's stepping down, he told me. The board's decided the church needs a new direction. And well, some of us think that includes rebuilding what we've lost. I hesitated. You mean? I mean the community owes you. You and the girls. I appreciated the sentiment. I really did. But some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some are meant to burn so others can find the light. One Saturday afternoon, Natalie came downstairs holding a box from the attic. Inside were old family photos, back when things looked normal on the surface. She held up a picture of all 4 of us at the lake. Michael had his arms around both girls. I remembered that weekend. I remembered thinking we were happy. "Do you want to keep these?" she asked. I looked at the photo, at the lie it represented, then at the daughters who had survived it. "No," I said softly. "I want you to remember who we are now, not who we were pretending to be." She nodded and set the box aside. Months passed. The church never reopened their Facebook group. Elaine and Henry never returned to their pew. And we, me, Natalie, and Grace, we built something better than peace. We built safety. We built truth. 1 year to the day after the courthouse ruling, I stood on a small stage in a community center auditorium. I'd been invited to speak at a forum for single parents navigating custody challenges and toxic in-laws. Public speaking had never been my thing. But when I looked out at the room, mothers, fathers, teenagers, even grandparents, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Conviction. So I spoke. Not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as a mother who chose to stop apologizing for protecting her children. I used to think silence was the mature thing, I told them. I thought if I just kept the peace, my daughters would be okay. But silence isn't peace. Sometimes it's permission. And I won't give that to anyone ever again. Afterward, 3 women came up to me in tears. One of them whispered, "I thought I was alone." I told her what I'd learned the hard way. You're never alone. You just haven't spoken loud enough for your people to find you. That night, I came home to a clean kitchen, the smell of brownies in the oven, and Grace humming to herself while Natalie danced around in socks. It wasn't perfect. There were still scars, but scars are proof you've healed. As we sat down for dessert, Natalie raised her glass of milk. "To survival," she grinned. "No," I said, smiling back. "To something better." Grace tilted her glass toward us. "To truth." We clinked our glasses and laughed, and somewhere deep inside me, a weight I hadn't known I was still carrying finally lifted.